Hey, what's happening, friend? Big dog Ethan here. Wonder if that clap woke you up. I had to do that clap to sync up the audio with the video I'm recording right now. But anyways, yeah, this is the Unnatural State of Affairs, where we talk politics and also listen to some banging tunes. So I think I'm going to start the commentary segment a little bit early the commentary segment's a little bit early today because, just because of the timing of the music segments that I put together. I'm going to give some brief commentary first on what's going on at Vanderbilt right now, because I think that is pretty important to discuss. It's just absolutely insane what we're seeing the Vanderbilt administration do to their student population right now. It's pretty frustrating. And then I'm going to leave for a very brief break. It's just our legally mandated station ID stuff. And then once I come back, I'm going to give you all of my thoughts on the role of objectivity in news media, especially as it relates to coverage of the plausible genocide that is occurring in Gaza as we speak. So, without any further ado, Vanderbilt insanity. So, due to time constraints, I don't have much prepared to say on this, but I at least wanted to give y'all some basic pointers about some insanity going on at Vanderbilt University. So the student government recently got a petition from the Vanderbilt Divestment Coalition of over 500 signatures to put an amendment up to a vote, which would make the student government abide by the practices of the BDS movement. This is a movement that calls on all businesses to cut ties with any Israeli organizations until the state of Israel decides to, 1, end its occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the wall, 2, recognize the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and 3, respect, protect, and promote the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. Now, Vanderbilt administration ain't having any of this. Citing a Tennessee law that bans any organizations engaged in contracts with state or local governments valued at more than $250,000, the administration banned the student government from voting on the amendment. They banned them from doing that. The student government is engaged in no such contracts and therefore would not be liable under this law. So the Vanderbilt Divestment Coalition organized a sit-in at the chancellor's office. Now, according to an email from Vanderbilt administration, pulling it up right now. I'm still trying to get used to doing all the tech stuff with just one small little screen. Uh-oh. Alrighty, well, we're not going to have sources for this segment. I'll have to fix that real quick. Anyways, so, yeah. According to an email from Vanderbilt administration provided to the Tennessee Holler, the building where the chancellor's office is located was under construction, though that's not very clear from videos and reports I've seen, so I am very curious about that claim. Now, they did have a police officer stationed at the front door of the building. Some students did force themselves past the police officer, which allowed for those specific students to be arrested on assault charges. After 18 hours of protesting, during most of which police officers prevented them from even using the bathroom, all the students were suspended and some arrested for trespassing, as suspended students aren't allowed to be on campus. Now, during this protest, a Nashville scene reporter was even arrested for, again, trespassing with no prior warning to leave, though Vanderbilt administration challenges this claim. In the email I previously cited, Vanderbilt administration claimed that the reporter had tried to enter the building multiple times and was told to leave, but District Attorney Glenn Funk disagreed with that claim. Quote, "This office will not prosecute a reporter for peacefully doing his or her job," unquote. Additionally, the Nashville City Council wrote a letter voicing their concerns about Vanderbilt administration's actions, asking to meet with the chancellor about it. Now, this story is going to develop over the coming days, so I'll be sure to keep y'all updated on it. You can find more information about it from the Vanderbilt Divestment Coalition's Instagram, which is at Vanderbilt Divest Coalition. Again, that handle is at Vanderbilt Divest Coalition. You can also find more updates at the Nashville Scenes website, and you can also find more updates at the Tennessee Holler's Instagram. Their handle is at the Tennessee Holler. As of now, of course, I stand in absolute solidarity with these protesters. The Vanderbilt student government was denied their right to vote on legitimate issues concerning the Vanderbilt student population, and the school's administration has only responded with increasingly authoritarian actions. My heart goes out to all the students who were suspended or arrested, as well as the student population of Vanderbilt. They were robbed of their right to proper governance by their student government, and that reflects incredibly poorly on the Vanderbilt administration. Alrighty, I'll be right back right after this break. Hey, what's happening, friend? Big dog Ethan here, coming at you live on WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And this is none other than the Unnatural State of Affairs, where we talk politics and also listen to some banging tunes as well. So, before the break, I gave y'all my thoughts on what's going on at Vanderbilt right now. It's pretty insane, to say the least. Next, I'll be talking about my thoughts on the role of the concept of objectivity in news media reporting, because these are some thoughts I've had kind of bubbling around for a while, probably since some of these for a while, but I really started thinking of some of these ideas in terms of the standard of objectivity in reporting after taking Professor Leon Alligood's class, Community Engagement, last year. That was really where he introduced us to a book that kind of got me thinking along those lines. So anyways, without any more babbling, I'm going to get into it now. So, on February 28th, The Intercept put out an article titled Between the Hammer and the Anvil. Now, unfortunately, I'm having some tech issues today, so I won't be able to show y'all the articles in real time, but I will be sure to cite those articles. I'll provide links to them in the description of the upload. You can find my podcast at www.thekennel. Never mind. It is thekennel.substack.com. If you type in the www. part, like, it just won't show up. It's very weird how it does that. But anyways, I'll be sure to cite all of these sources so you can go check them out for yourself. Yeah, that's something I'll need to figure out if I'm going to continue doing these shows live here and then recording them here as well. But anyways, so on February 28th, 2024, The Intercept put out an article titled Between the Hammer and the Anvil. Now, a trigger alert here, this article, and really this segment as a whole, we'll touch on topics involving sexual assault. If you've been a victim of sexual assault or know someone who has, you can find resources on that at https://w1.mtsu.edu/sexual-violence/. The article is a thorough dissection of the poor journalistic practices employed by the New York Times in producing a December 29th article titled Screams Without Words. The article attempted to make the case that on October 7th, Hamas employed sexual assault as a systematic tactic in their attack, which left over 1,200 people dead. Questions around the New York Times article first arose after one of its writers, Anat Schwartz, had liked a tweet calling on Israel to, quote, turn the Strip into a slaughterhouse, unquote. This tweet was even cited in South Africa's initial request to the International Court of Justice to investigate the possibility that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. This appears to be a violation of the New York Times policies for reporter conduct on social media, as they did note in the Intercept article that leaders at the New York Times are continuing to investigate it. In fact, they're doing a lot of investigating because after all the drama surrounding this article unfolded, now they are starting to interrogate different reporters, like different parts of their staff, to figure out who leaked all this information to the Intercept, which is hilarious. That is their response to poor editorial practices, as we'll expand upon here in a second. So issues in the reporting process for this New York Times article, they appeared from the article's very inception. Schwartz had no experience doing any kind of news reporting for a professional news outlet. Her career? She is a filmmaker and a former Air Force intelligence official for the Israeli Defense Force. The Intercept article translated an entire podcast interview from Israel's Channel 12 news outlet, conducted in Hebrew with Anat Schwartz. This is from the Intercept article. Quote, Schwartz said she was initially reluctant to take the assignment because she did not want to look at visual images of potential assaults and because she lacked the expertise to conduct such an investigation. Victims of sexual assault are women who have experienced something. And then to come and sit in front of such a woman, who am I anyway? She said. I have no qualifications. Unquote. Nonetheless, she began working with Jeffrey Gettleman on the story, she explained in the podcast interview. Gettleman, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, is an international correspondent, and when he is sent to a bureau, he works with news assistants and freelancers on stories. In this case, several newsroom sources familiar with the process said Schwartz and Sella did the vast majority of the ground reporting, while Gettleman focused on the framing and writing, unquote. So, already, there are glaring issues. We've got one person on a team of 3 working on an article for one of the most prominent news outlets in the country, an article that has a massive claim to prove on a topic of international importance. Yet, she's got 0 reporting experience at all, and she's being given the task of digging up all the evidence to support the article's, again, massive claim. But it gets worse. Quote, the fear among Times staffers who have been critical of the paper's Gaza coverage is that Schwartz will become a scapegoat for what is a much deeper failure. She may harbor animosity towards Palestinians, lack the experience with investigative journalism, and feel conflicting pressures between being a supporter of Israel's war effort and a Times reporter. But Schwartz did not commission herself and Sella to report one of the most consequential stories of the war. Senior leadership at the New York Times did. Schwartz said as much in an interview with Israeli Army Radio on December 31st. Quote, the New York Times said, let's do an investigation into sexual violence. It was more of a case of them having to convince me, she said. Her host cut her off. It was a proposal of the New York Times, the entire thing? Unequivocally, obviously, of course, she said. The paper stood behind us 200% and gave us the time, the investment, the resources to go in depth with this investigation as much as needed. Unquote. The New York Times their leadership, commissioned her, not the other way around. It's not like she came to them and somehow convinced them of her credibility to suddenly report on such a hefty topic. Leaders at the New York Times went to her. Again, despite her having no experience reporting for a professional outlet. This is another piece from the Intercept article. Quote, in the podcast interview, Schwartz details her extensive efforts to get confirmation from Israeli hospitals, rape crisis centers, trauma recovery facilities, and sex assault hotlines in Israel, as well as her inability to get a single confirmation from any of them. Quote, she was told there had been no complaints made of sexual assault, the Times spokesperson acknowledged after The Intercept brought the Channel 12 podcast episode to the paper's attention. Quote, this, however, was just the very first step of her research. She then describes the unfolding of evidence, testimonies, and eventual evidence that there may have been systematic use of sexual assault, unquote, the spokesperson asserted. Quote, she details her research steps and emphasizes the Times' strict standards to corroborate evidence and meetings with reporters and editors to discuss probing questions and think critically about the story, unquote. The question has never been whether individual acts of sexual assault may have occurred on October 7th. Rape is not uncommon in war, and there were also several hundred civilians who poured into Israel from Gaza that day in a, quote, second wave, unquote, contributing to and participating in the mayhem and violence. The central issue is whether the New York Times presented solid evidence to support its claim that there were newly reported details, quote, establishing that the attacks against women were not isolated events, but part of a broader pattern of gender-based violence on October 7th, unquote. A claim stated in the headline that Hamas deliberately deployed sexual violence as a weapon of war, unquote. That was not done very effectively. Annette Schwartz and her romantic partner's nephew, Adam Sella, failed to obtain such evidence, relying on unsubstantiated claims from, quote, Israeli officials, soldiers, and Zaka workers, unquote, to justify their claim. The New York Times article opened with a graphic scene describing the evidence used to claim that a woman named Gal Abdush was raped before being slaughtered and burned. Her family, however, doesn't agree with that claim. Quote, it doesn't make any sense, said Abdush's sister, that in a short time span, quote, they raped her, slaughtered her, and burned her, unquote. Speaking about the rape allegation, her brother-in-law said, quote, the media invented it, unquote. Another relative suggested the family was pressured under false pretenses to speak with the reporters. Abdush's sister wrote on Instagram that the Times reporters, quote, mentioned that they want to write a report in memory of Gal, and that's it. If we knew that the title would be about rape and butchery, we'd never accept that, unquote. In its follow-up story, the Times sought to discredit her initial comment, quoting Abdush's sister as saying she, quote, had been confused about what happened and was trying to protect my sister, unquote. The woman who filmed Abdush on October 7th told the Israeli site Ynet that Schwartz and Sella had pressured her into giving the paper access to her photos and videos for the purposes of serving Israeli propaganda. Quote, they called me again and again and explained how important it is to Israeli Hasbara, she recalled, using the term for public diplomacy, which in practice refers to Israeli propaganda efforts directed at international audiences, unquote. So these reporters, commissioned by the New York Times, explicitly said in their information gathering process that their motivation was not to report the objective facts. Rather, they were motivated by a need to further Israeli propaganda efforts. Jeffrey Gettleman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who synthesized all of Annette Schwartz and Adam Sella's information into the article, also made some telling remarks regarding the role of the press today. Quote, after the article was published, Gettleman was invited to speak on a panel about sexual violence at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. His efforts were lauded by the panel and its host, Sandberg, the former Facebook executive. Instead of doubling down on reporting that helped win the New York Times a prestigious Polk Award, I always get confused on that. Anyways, prestigious Polk Award, Gettleman dismissed the need for reporters to provide evidence. Quote, what we found, I don't want to even use the word evidence, because evidence is almost like a legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation or prove a case in court, Gettleman told Sandberg. Quote, that's not my role. We all have our roles, and my role is to document, is to present information, is to give people a voice. and we found information along the entire chain of violence, so of sexual violence, unquote. Gettleman said his mission was to move people. Quote, it's really difficult to get this information and then to shape it, he said. That's our job as journalists, to get the information and to share the story in a way that makes people care. Not just to inform, but to move people. And that's what I've been doing for a long time. One Times reporter said colleagues are wondering what a balanced approach might look like. Quote, I am waiting to see if the paper will report in depth, deploying the same kind of resources and means on the United Nations report that documented the horrors committed against Palestinian women, unquote. Yeah, that's quite the mic drop for an article to end on. It's at this point I want to focus on a broader idea about the role of news media in today's society. We've always assumed, really since the 1930s, that the press simply reports the objective truth about what's going on in today's society. Yet, as we've seen with this expose from The Intercept, that doesn't really seem to be the case. On a wider scale, we hardly see a semblance of objectivity. The Intercept also found in January that coverage from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times overwhelmingly held a pro-Israel bias. Namely, it found that, quote, major U.S. newspapers disproportionately emphasized Israeli deaths in the conflict, used emotive language to describe the killings of Israelis, but not Palestinians, and offered lopsided coverage of anti-Semitic acts in the U.S., while largely ignoring anti-Muslim racism in the wake of October 7th, unquote. One disturbing fact that I'd like to note from this article, from October 7th to November 25th last year, as the deaths of Palestinians rose throughout the attacks on Gaza, mentions of Palestinians declined in these outlets' reporting. There's a lot more you can learn from this article. You can find a link to it, again, along with every source that I cite on the recording I'll upload to the kennel, or in the description of the recording that I'll upload to the kennel. But, of course, I also have to mention Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky's propaganda model from their 1988 book, Manufacturing Consent, whenever railing against the idea of objectivity in media. The book articulates a propaganda model to explain how the structural incentives of for-profit news outlets result, for the most part, in warped reporting on current events that favor the interests of the ruling class. It applies this model to 5 other case studies, proving that these outlets overwhelmingly operate on a flawed incentive when producing news content. But why do outlets claim to be objective then? Well, I mean, for one, there's the PR reasons. They're not going to outright say, we report on current events in a warped manner. Like, that's probably not going to drive up audience numbers for them. Well, unless you're Jeffrey Kettleman and question the need for evidence in your reporting, then yes, I guess you'll be fully honest about that. But, and frankly, I have to commend him for his honesty. I mean, yeah, just absolute wild comment to make as a New York Times reporter. Furthermore, regarding why outlets claim to be objective, there's actually an ulterior motive as to why news outlet owners first began to champion the mantra of objectivity in their organization's content. Lewis Raven Wallace writes in his 2019 book, The View from Somewhere, Undoing the Myth of Journalistic Objectivity. News outlets made objectivity their standard in the 1930s to crack down on reporters' unionization efforts. They were demanding better wages, but the bosses didn't want to listen. Quote, the American Newspaper Guild, under the leadership of Haywood Broun, held its first convention in 1934. The editor of Editor and Publisher, Marlon Pugh, spoke out against the idea of a trade union of journalists before this meeting even occurred, as did Roy Howard, chairman of the Scripps Howard newspaper chain. Both argued that a union would compromise impartiality, a key part of objectivity for journalists, unquote. This is why news outlets claim to be the arbiters of the objective truth. Not only does it serve to capture the trust of audiences, it also serves to crack down on any reporters who challenge the ideology of wealthy elites that inherently govern these same news media institutions. Thankfully, a 1937 Supreme Court case protected journalists' right to unionize, but the main intent of the standard still holds today. This intent hampers journalists' abilities to challenge authority when really this should be their main goal. Of what use is a standard for news reporting that inherently defends the status quo? We need a news industry that informs citizens as to how to improve society, not to propagandize them into accepting the status quo for what it is, or worse, advocating for a change to the status quo that ultimately benefits wealthy elites and harms middle and working class citizens. So, I'd like to conclude this segment with a building point for a new set of reporting standards, and some observations about the journalism program here at MTSU. At the end of The View from Somewhere, Wallace suggests some starting points for defining a new set of journalistic principles. Quote, I propose hanging on to some basic tenets of traditional journalistic ethics: verification and fact-checking, editorial independence from political parties and corporations, clarity and transparency about financial and political conflicts of interest, and deep, thorough sourcing. I also join a chorus of journalists who have been gradually replacing objectivity with the practice of radical transparency about both our values and methodologies. Finally, I think defining our values as journalists when journalism is under attack means admitting that we are activists and becoming clear what we are activists for. Unquote. I think this is an excellent starting point, and I think it might be sensible for the journalism department here to consider Wallace's suggestions. Multiple times, I've encountered professors who still hold to this principle. Certainly not out of the ill intentions of news outlet owners, but out of genuine beliefs that this standard leads to good reporting, and out of a desire to see their students succeed here at MTSU and in their postgraduate careers. But as an academic institution, I think it's important for professors to recognize when certain practices in their areas of study and professions are no longer valid. And certainly when said practices are leading to the degradation of the industry they're preparing their students to enter. I'm not here to propose specific changes to our curriculum. That's not my role as a student. But it is my role as a student to question the instruction I'm receiving out of a genuine desire to learn and become the best news media creator that I can be. It's out of this desire that I question our current instruction on journalistic standards. And it's out of this desire that I inform the School of Journalism that there is an urgent need to galvanize our students in challenging the standards of reporting that for so long have resulted in detrimental effects to journalism, to the content that gets produced, and therefore to the larger population as a whole. Finally, I'd like to leave with some words from Mario Savio that have stuck with me ever since reading them in my U.S. History 2 class last year. Savio was an undergraduate student at the University of California in Berkeley during the Civil Rights Movement, and a forefront leader on free speech issues. It was simply for this that the FBI actually spied on him, as declassified documents would later show. On December 2nd, 1964, he gave the end of history speech on the steps of the university's Sprout Hall. Quote, many students here at the university, many people in society, are wandering aimlessly about, strangers in their own lives. There is no place for them. They are people who have not learned to compromise, who, for example, have come to the university to learn to question, to grow, to learn, all the standard things that sound like cliches because no one takes them seriously. And they find at one point or another that for them to become part of society, to become lawyers, ministers, businessmen, people in government, that very often they must compromise those principles which were most dear to them. They must suppress the most creative impulses that they have. This is a prior condition for being part of the system. The university is well structured, well tooled to turn out people with all the sharp edges worn off, the well-rounded person. the university is well equipped to produce that sort of person. And this means that the best among the people who enter must for 4 years wander aimlessly much of the time, questioning why they are on campus at all, doubting whether there is any point in what they are doing, and looking toward a very bleak existence afterward, in a game in which all the rules have been made up, which one cannot really amend. It is a bleak scene, but it is all a lot of us have to look forward to. Society provides us no challenge. American society is the standard conception it has of itself is simply no longer exciting. The most exciting things going on in America today are movements to change America. America is becoming ever more the utopia of sterilized, automated contentment. The futures and careers for which American students now prepare are for the most part intellectual and moral wastelands. This chrome-plated consumer's paradise would have us grow up to be well-behaved children, but an important minority of men and women coming to the front today have shown that they will die rather than be standardized, replaceable, and irrelevant. Unquote. That speech just absolutely resonates with me as a journalism student, because the more and more I observe the state of the news media industry, I start to recognize that things are not looking up for it, and I think it's incumbent on the School of Journalism to be asking its students about that and deciding what is the best way forward for the news industry. And in my opinion, at least, I think the rejection of objectivity, that is the best way forward for the news industry, among a number of other things, such as increased public funding of public news media outlets as well. I've been reading a book now called Democracy in Journalism, which basically makes the argument for complete public financing of news media outlets like they do in Scandinavian countries. Because right now, this whole practice of laissez-faire capitalism in the news media industry is just, it's not a good practice. It's not leading to good coverage, and it's certainly not leading to even just a stability of jobs in the journalism industry. Right now, all it's leading to is increased layoffs, increased consolidation, the shuttering of big news outlets. Like I'm sure some of y'all have heard about how Vice recently is essentially closing its doors. Same goes for Pitchfork and a number of other outlets. So right now, the news media industry is just not in a good state at this point in time. And I think, again, I think it is incumbent upon academic institutions like MTSU to be asking its journalism students, what the hell are we going to do about this? Hey friend, that's all I've got for today, but thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of The Unnatural State of Affairs. The Unnatural State of Affairs broadcasts on WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee from 8 to 10 a.m. on Thursdays. The broadcasted version is censored, but I do also have a full DJ hour in the broadcasted version. I mostly play punk rock music and some rap music as well. And if you can't tune in at that time, though, you can also find the uncensored versions of all my talk show segments that day on my Substack, The Kennel, and you can also find audio-only versions on Spotify. If you liked what I had to say, hit that like button. If you have any thoughts that you want to share, hit me up in the comments section down below. And if you want to be notified of the next upload that I make, hit that subscribe button. You'll get an email in your inbox the next time I make an upload, and you'll also get a notification through the Substack app if you have that on your device. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good one.